The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Teknova Industries' corporate headquarters in Palo Alto, California. At 6:30 a.m. on a grey Monday morning in March 2025, the 40-story glass tower stood nearly empty, its sleek corridors echoing with the hum of ventilation systems and the distant buzz of early-arriving security personnel. Marcus Thompson pushed his janitor's cart through the marble lobby, the wheels squeaking slightly against the polished floor. At 28, with his UCLA Business Administration degree and 3 years of financial consulting experience, he never imagined he'd be here. But desperate times called for desperate measures. 6 months of unemployment had drained his savings, and his landlord's patience had run thin. "Look at this guy," snickered a voice from the executive elevator bank. "Probably couldn't even spell quarterly report if his life depended on it." Marcus looked up to see 3 men in expensive suits waiting for the elevator. The speaker was tall, thin, with silver hair slicked back. Everything about him screamed corporate arrogance. His companions laughed at the comment, their voices carrying across the empty lobby. "Careful, Richardson," one of them said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "He might report us to HR for being mean to the help." More laughter followed. Marcus gripped the mop handle tighter but said nothing. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy was to remain invisible, to observe. These weren't just any employees. Their confident swagger and early arrival suggested they were executives. The silver-haired man wore a Rolex that probably cost more than Marcus's annual rent. "Morning, gentlemen," Marcus said politely, continuing to mop around the base of the massive reception desk. "Oh, it talks!" Richardson exclaimed, causing another round of chuckles. "Tell me, what's your 5-year plan? Become head janitor." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and the 3 men stepped inside, their laughter fading as the doors closed. Marcus watched the numbers climb. 38, 39, 40. Executive floor. As Marcus continued his work, he couldn't help but notice the impressive lobby around him. Teknova had spared no expense. Italian marble floors, contemporary art installations, and a digital display showcasing their stock price and latest innovations in artificial intelligence and cloud computing. The company had gone public just 2 years ago and was valued at over $15 billion. "Don't mind them," came a kind voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see a woman in her early 50s approaching, carrying a steaming coffee cup. She had warm brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a professional bun. Her name tag read Sarah Martinez, Human Resources Director. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending her hand. "You must be Marcus. Welcome to Teknova." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity," Marcus replied, shaking her hand with his still damp cleaning glove. "That was David Richardson, our CFO," Sarah explained, nodding toward where the elevator had been. "Don't let his attitude get to you. Some people forget that every job here matters." Marcus nodded, filing away the information. "CFO." That explained the arrogance and the expensive watch. "Your supervisor, Jim, will be in around 7:30, Sarah continued. "He's good people, been with the company since the beginning. He'll show you the ropes, but it looks like you're already settling in fine." As Sarah headed toward the elevator bank, Marcus returned to his mopping, but his mind was elsewhere. He observed everything. The security cameras positioned at strategic angles, the badge readers at every door, the way employees swiped their cards and entered codes. His finance background had taught him that understanding systems and processes was crucial, whether you were analyzing investment portfolios or, apparently, mopping floors. By 8 a.m., the lobby was bustling with activity. Employees streamed in from the parking garage and street entrances, most barely acknowledging Marcus's presence. He had become part of the furniture, invisible in his grey uniform and with his cleaning supplies. It was a perfect position for observation. "Marcus!" called a gruff but friendly voice. A heavy-set man in his 60s approached, wearing the same grey uniform. "I'm Jim Patterson, Facilities Supervisor. Ready for the grand tour?" "Absolutely, sir," Marcus replied, grateful for the genuine warmth in Jim's voice, such a contrast to Richardson's condescension. First thing you need to know, Jim said as they walked toward the service elevator, is that this place runs 24/7. We've got 3 shifts of cleaning crew, but day shift sees the most action. You'll be covering floors 1 through 20, lots of conference rooms, break areas, and open workspace. As they rode the service elevator up, Jim continued his orientation. Technova's been good to me for 8 years. Started here when they had maybe 50 employees. Now we're pushing 3,000 worldwide, about 800 in this building alone. The elevator stopped at floor 15, and Jim led Marcus into a world of cubicles and glass-walled offices. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating workstations equipped with multiple monitors, high-end computers, and the usual tech company perks. Ping-pong tables, a fully stocked kitchen, and even a meditation room. Engineering floor, Jim explained. These folks work crazy hours, so there's always coffee spills and late-night pizza boxes to clean up. But they're good people. They'll treat you right. Marcus nodded, taking mental notes of the layout, the security measures, and the general atmosphere. The employees he encountered were indeed friendlier than the executives from the lobby, offering smiles, good mornings, and genuine appreciation for his work. One thing about this job, Jim said as they moved to another floor, you see everything. People think we're invisible, so they talk freely around us. You'll hear about projects, problems, office drama, all kinds of stuff. My advice? Keep your ears open, but your mouth shut. Trust is everything in this business. As the morning progressed, Marcus began to understand the rhythm of Technova. The company was clearly successful. State-of-the-art facilities, happy employees, and cutting-edge technology everywhere. But there were small details that caught his trained financial eye. Expensive artwork that seemed inconsistent with typical corporate purchases, executive parking spots filled with luxury cars that seemed excessive even for Silicon Valley standards, and casual conversations about budget allocations that raised subtle red flags. Around 11 a.m., while cleaning a conference room on the 25th floor, Marcus overheard a heated discussion from the adjacent room. Through the thin walls, he could make out voices, one of them distinctly David Richardson's. The quarterly numbers need to be adjusted before the board meeting, Richardson was saying. We can't show that kind of variance without explanation. But David, that's not exactly, another voice protested. Just handle it, Peterson. That's what you're paid for. Marcus continued wiping down the conference table, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid drawing attention while he listened. His financial background made him acutely aware that adjusting quarterly numbers could mean many things, some legitimate, others decidedly not. The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Richardson clearly in control and Peterson, whoever he was, reluctantly agreeing to something that made Marcus's instincts tingle with concern. As lunchtime approached, Marcus found himself in the executive break room on the 38th floor, a luxurious space with leather furniture, a full kitchen, and a spectacular view of the San Francisco Bay. He was emptying trash cans when Richardson and 2 other executives entered, not bothering to lower their voices in the presence of just the janitor. The Monaco trip was incredible, Richardson was saying, settling into a leather chair with his lunch. The yacht alone cost more than most people make in a year, but it's all about maintaining relationships with our European partners. Marcus continued his work, invisible and ignored, as the men discussed expensive trips, luxury purchases, and business dealings that seemed to blur the line between corporate necessity and personal indulgence. His trained ear picked up references to expense accounts, private jets, and consulting fees that seemed unusually high. Richardson's really living it up, one of them commented. That new Bentley in the parking garage must be nice being CFO. Hey, I work hard for this company, Richardson replied with a laugh. Besides, image is everything in this business. Clients expect a certain level of sophistication. As Marcus finished cleaning and prepared to move to the next area, Richardson called out to him. Hey, janitor boy, Richardson said, his voice dripping with condescension. Make sure you get the fingerprints off that glass table. I've got important clients coming in this afternoon, and I can't have them thinking we don't maintain proper standards." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied politely, giving the already spotless table another wipe. "That's the spirit," Richardson said to his companions. "See how easy it is when people know their place." The other executives chuckled, and Marcus felt his jaw clench. But he maintained his composure, finished his task, and quietly left the room. As he pushed his cart toward the service elevator, his mind was already working, analyzing the fragments of conversation and behavior he'd observed. Something wasn't right at Technova. Richardson's lifestyle seemed inconsistent with even a generous CFO salary, and the casual way he discussed adjusting numbers raised serious red flags. Marcus had seen enough corporate malfeasance in his consulting days to recognize the warning signs. But he was just a janitor now, wasn't he? Who would listen to his suspicions? And more importantly, what could he possibly do about it? As the day ended, and Marcus prepared to head home to his modest apartment, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start paying even closer attention. If there was something corrupt happening at Technova, he would find out what it was. After all, sometimes the best view of a company's true operations came from the bottom up. The rain had stopped by the time Marcus left the building, but storm clouds were still gathering on the horizon. As he walked to his beat-up Honda Civic in the employee parking lot, passing Richardson's gleaming new Bentley, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something much bigger than financial irregularities. He just didn't know yet that his own story was about to take a turn that would shock everyone, including himself. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Thompson's first day at Technova Industries. The routine had become second nature. Arrive at 6:30 a.m., clean through the building systematically, and blend into the background while executives and employees went about their daily business. But for Marcus, these 3 weeks had been an intensive course in corporate espionage, though none of his targets knew they were being watched. The morning fog hung thick over Palo Alto as Marcus pushed his cart through the executive floor. It was Thursday, April 17th, 2025, and the quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the following week. The tension in the building was palpable. Executives huddled in urgent conversations, assistants rushed between offices with stacks of documents, and the normally relaxed Silicon Valley atmosphere had given way to corporate stress. "Peterson, get in here!" David Richardson's voice boomed from his corner office as Marcus mopped the hallway outside. Through the partially open door, Marcus could see Peterson, a nervous-looking man in his 40s whom Marcus had identified as the senior financial analyst. Peterson's hands shook slightly as he carried a folder thick with financial reports. "Close the door," Richardson commanded. Marcus slowed his mopping, positioning himself near the door. The executive floor was empty except for Richardson's assistant, who was on a coffee run, and the cleaning staff was generally invisible to the executives anyway. "David, I've run these numbers 5 times. Peterson's voice was strained, barely audible through the door. "There's no way to make the quarterly expenditures look legitimate without raising red flags. The board's forensic accountant will spot these discrepancies immediately." "That's your problem to solve, not mine." Richardson's voice was cold, authoritative. "I don't pay you 6 figures to tell me what can't be done. I pay you to make problems disappear." Marcus continued his methodical mopping, moving closer to the door. His UCLA finance training had taught him to recognize the language of financial manipulation, and what he was hearing made his stomach turn. "But David, we're talking about $2.3 million in questionable expenses over the last quarter alone. Private jet usage that doesn't correlate with business travel, consulting fees to companies that don't seem to exist, expense accounts that—" "Enough!" Richardson's voice cut through Peterson's protests. "You think I don't know what we're dealing with? This company generates over $100 million in quarterly revenue. A few million in operational expenses is a rounding error. The key is presentation." Marcus heard chairs moving, footsteps. He quickly moved his mop bucket further down the hall, but kept his ears tuned to the conversation. "Look, Peterson, Richardson's voice had taken on a friendlier, almost mentoring tone. Technova is a rocket ship. We're disrupting entire industries, creating value that didn't exist 5 years ago. Sometimes that requires creative solutions. The board understands that innovation costs money. Creative solutions? Peterson's voice was barely a whisper. David, this isn't innovation funding. This is business, Richardson interrupted firmly. And if you want to continue being part of this business, you'll find a way to make those numbers work. Am I clear? There was a long pause before Peterson responded, his voice defeated. Yes, sir. I'll figure something out. Good man. And Peterson, our conversation stays between us. Client confidentiality and all that. Marcus heard the door handle turning and quickly moved around the corner, pushing his cart toward the elevator bank. Peterson emerged looking pale and shaken, clutching his folder like a lifeline. He walked past Marcus without seeing him, lost in thought and clearly troubled. As Marcus continued his rounds, his mind raced through what he'd heard. $2.3 million in questionable expenses, private jets, non-existent consulting companies, expense account fraud. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of systematic financial fraud at the highest levels of Technova. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the break room on the accounting floor, Marcus struck up a casual conversation with Jennifer Walsh, a junior accountant who always treated him with kindness. Busy week? Marcus asked as he wiped down the counters. Jennifer looked up from her microwaved lunch, stress evident in her expression. You have no idea. We're scrambling to get everything ready for the quarterly board meeting. Some of the expense reports we're getting from upstairs. She shook her head and took a sip of her coffee. Problems? Marcus asked innocently, continuing to clean. I probably shouldn't be talking about this, Jennifer said, lowering her voice, but some of these executive expense claims are just weird. Like we've got receipts for a $50,000 client entertainment dinner at a restaurant in Monaco that, according to our travel records, none of our executives were supposed to be near. And don't get me started on the consulting fees. Marcus nodded sympathetically. Sounds complicated. The thing is, Jennifer continued, apparently needing someone to vent to, Mr. Peterson keeps sending down these revised reports with adjustments that make everything look normal. But the original reports, she shrugged helplessly, let's just say they told a different story. I'm sure it'll all work out, Marcus said, giving her an encouraging smile. Big companies, big numbers, probably just paperwork mix-ups. Yeah, maybe, Jennifer said, but she didn't sound convinced. That evening, Marcus sat in his modest apartment overlooking the city lights of Palo Alto, his laptop open on his small kitchen table. He'd created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every suspicious conversation, every unusual expense mention, every red flag he'd observed over the past 3 weeks. The pattern was becoming clear. Richardson was systematically siphoning money from Technova through fake consulting contracts, inflated expense accounts, and unauthorized personal use of company resources. But Marcus knew that suspicions and overheard conversations wouldn't be enough. He needed hard evidence, and getting that evidence would require taking significant risks. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work with a new mission. While performing his usual cleaning duties, he began to map out the security systems, badge access points, and camera coverage throughout the building. His target was Richardson's office and the financial records that would prove the fraud. "Morning, Marcus," called Sarah Martinez as she entered the lobby. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you, Ms. Martinez," Marcus replied. "Everyone's been very welcoming. I'm glad to hear it. You know, Jim Patterson tells me you're one of the most reliable workers he's seen in years. Punctual, thorough, and professional. We appreciate that. Just doing my job, ma'am." "Well, keep it up. Good work doesn't go unnoticed around here." As Sarah headed to the elevator, Marcus reflected on her words. If only she knew the real work he was doing and what he was uncovering about her company's CFO. The breakthrough came during lunch hour on Friday. Most of the executive floor was empty as people headed out for lunch meetings or to the company cafeteria. Marcus was cleaning Richardson's office, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley, expensive artwork, and a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richardson's computer was locked, but his filing cabinet was slightly ajar. Marcus knew he was taking an enormous risk, but he also knew this might be his only chance. He quickly pulled out his phone and began photographing documents, expense reports, consulting contracts, bank statements that had been carelessly left in open files. What he found made his blood run cold. The consulting contracts were with companies that existed only on paper, shell corporations set up to funnel Technova money into Richardson's personal accounts. The expense reports showed a lifestyle of incredible excess. $25,000 dinners charged as client entertainment, private jet flights to vacation destinations listed as business development, and luxury hotel stays that had nothing to do with company business. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten note in Richardson's own writing. Peterson compliance issues, need alternative accounting structure, consider replacement if necessary. Marcus photographed everything quickly, his heart pounding as he heard voices in the hallway. He carefully returned the documents to their original positions and resumed cleaning just as Richardson's assistant returned from lunch. "Oh, hi, Marcus," she said cheerfully. "Mr. Richardson is in meetings all afternoon, so take your time in there." "Thank you, ma'am. Just finishing up." That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment staring at the photographs on his phone. He had enough evidence to expose Richardson's fraud, but he faced a critical problem. Who could he trust with this information? As a janitor with no official standing in the company, would anyone believe him? And more importantly, how deep did the corruption go? Was Richardson acting alone, or were other executives involved? The answer came the following Monday morning. While cleaning early before the executives arrived, Marcus overheard a phone conversation that chilled him to the bone. Richardson was in his office, speaking in hushed tones to someone on the phone. "No, the Peterson situation is handled. He's scared enough to keep quiet, and if he becomes a problem, we'll deal with it. The board meeting is Thursday. Everything needs to look perfect." There was a pause as Richardson listened to the other party. "Trust me, no one suspects anything. To them, I'm the financial wizard who's helped Technova grow from startup to billion-dollar company. A few million in operational expenses is nothing compared to our overall success. The board will approve anything I put in front of them." Another pause. "The janitor? Are you serious? These cleaning people are barely literate. Even if one of them overheard something, who's going to believe them over me?" Marcus's hands clenched around his mop handle. Richardson's arrogance was breathtaking, and it was about to be his downfall. As the week progressed toward the board meeting, Marcus finalized his plan. He'd spent sleepless nights researching Technova's board of directors, understanding the company's structure, and preparing his evidence. But there was one more thing he needed to do, something that would require revealing a secret he'd kept hidden since his first day at the company. Wednesday evening, Marcus made 2 critical phone calls from his apartment. The first was to the SEC's fraud hotline, where he submitted a detailed report complete with photographic evidence. The second call was much more personal and would change everything. "Hello, Mr. Blackstone. This is Marcus Thompson. I think it's time we had that conversation." Thursday morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for what Marcus knew would be the most important day of his life. As he arrived at Technova and pushed his cleaning cart through the lobby for what he suspected might be the last time, Richardson's mocking laughter from 3 weeks ago echoed in his mind. Probably couldn't even spell quarterly report if his life depended on it. Marcus smiled grimly as he headed toward the service elevator. Richardson was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Marcus had exactly 6 hours to prepare for the moment that would expose the truth and shock everyone who thought they knew who he really was. The Technova boardroom on the 40th floor was an architectural marvel, a glass-enclosed sanctuary with panoramic views of Silicon Valley, where billion-dollar decisions were made with the casual ease of ordering coffee. At 1:30 p.m. on Thursday, April 24, 2025, the room buzzed with pre-meeting energy as board members, executives, and key stakeholders gathered for the quarterly review. Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart down the executive hallway, his grey uniform and invisible status providing the perfect cover for what was about to unfold. But today, unlike every other day for the past month, Marcus carried something extra. A sealed envelope in his uniform pocket, and the weight of a secret that would soon send shockwaves through the corporate world. "Make sure that boardroom is spotless," barked Richardson as he passed Marcus in the hallway, adjusting his $3,000 Italian tie. "We've got the most important investors on the West Coast in there today, and I won't have them thinking we can't maintain basic standards." "Yes, sir, Mr. Richardson," Marcus replied with his usual deference, though internally he was counting down the minutes until Richardson's world would collapse. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was one of confident success. Technova's stock had risen 23% over the quarter. Their AI technology was leading the market, and their cloud computing division had just secured 3 major Fortune 500 contracts. Board members chatted casually about golf tournaments and vacation homes, while assistants arranged materials and tested presentation equipment. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Chairman Harold Blackstone, a distinguished man in his late 60s, whose silver hair and commanding presence reflected 4 decades of Silicon Valley leadership. To his right was CEO Patricia Chen, Technova's brilliant founder, whose vision had built the company from a garage startup to a global technology leader. Around the table were 8 other board members, venture capitalists, industry veterans, and independent directors who collectively represented billions in investment capital. "David's presentation should be interesting," commented board member Janet Morrison, a former Goldman Sachs partner. The preliminary numbers looked exceptional, especially considering the market volatility this quarter. "Richardson's always been solid with the financials," agreed board member Robert Hayes, founder of 3 successful tech companies. "His expense management has been particularly impressive, keeping operational costs under control while we scale rapidly." Richardson entered the room at exactly 1:45 p.m., carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the confident smile of a man who believed himself untouchable. He took his seat at Blackstone's left, directly across from CEO Chen, and began arranging his presentation materials. "Afternoon, everyone," Richardson said, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "I think you're going to be very pleased with this quarter's performance. We've not only met our targets, but exceeded them in several key areas." Meanwhile, Marcus had entered the boardroom under the pretense of a final cleaning check. He methodically wiped down the sideboard where coffee and pastries were arranged, emptied the wastebaskets, and ensured the water glasses were perfectly positioned. To everyone in the room, he was invisible, just another service employee ensuring their comfort. But Marcus was listening to every word, observing every interaction, and preparing for a moment that had been carefully orchestrated through phone calls and secret meetings that none of these powerful people suspected. "Marcus," called Patricia Chen kindly, noticing him as he worked near her chair, "thank you for keeping everything so pristine up here. The attention to detail hasn't gone unnoticed." "My pleasure, ma'am," Marcus replied with a genuine smile. Chen was one of the few executives who consistently treated all employees with respect, and Marcus had grown to genuinely admire her leadership style and vision for the company. "Before we begin," Chairman Blackstone announced as the clock struck 2 p.m., "I want to acknowledge the exceptional work our entire team has done this quarter. Technova continues to be a model for responsible growth and innovation in the technology sector." Richardson's smile widened at the praise, completely unaware that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "David, the floor is yours," Blackstone continued. "Walk us through the quarterly financials." Richardson stood, activating the room's massive display screen with a wireless remote. The first slide showed Technova's logo and the quarter's highlights, revenue up 18%, client acquisition exceeding targets by 12%, and operational efficiency improvements across all divisions. "Thank you, Harold," Richardson began, his presentation polished and professional. "As you can see, this has been an outstanding quarter for Technova. Our revenue growth continues to outpace industry averages, and I'm particularly proud of how we've managed our operational expenses." Marcus continued his cleaning routine, but his attention was laser-focused on Richardson's presentation. Every chart, every graph, every carefully crafted explanation was a masterpiece of financial manipulation, presenting fraudulent numbers with such confidence that the board was nodding approvingly. "Our expense management deserves special attention," Richardson continued, clicking to a slide showing various cost categories. "We've invested strategically in client relationships, international business development, and operational consulting that has directly contributed to our growth trajectory." Board member Morrison leaned forward, studying the numbers. "These consulting expenses seem robust, David. Can you break down the ROI on those investments?" "Absolutely, Janet," Richardson replied smoothly. "Our consulting partnerships have been instrumental in opening European markets and optimizing our operational structures. The $2.3 million investment this quarter has directly resulted in the 3 major contracts Patricia mentioned earlier." Marcus nearly dropped his cleaning cloth. Richardson was brazenly lying, attributing stolen money to legitimate business development. The audacity was breathtaking. CEO Chen frowned slightly, consulting her own notes. "David, I don't recall approving $3 million in consulting fees this quarter. That seems inconsistent with our operational budget discussions." For just a moment, Richardson's confidence flickered. "Patricia, those approvals went through the normal channels. I can provide you with the detailed breakdowns after the meeting." "I'd like to see those breakdowns now," interjected board member Hayes. "That's a significant expense that should have cross-departmental visibility." The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. Marcus could feel the tension building as board members began asking more pointed questions. Richardson was still in control, but cracks were appearing in his presentation. "Of course," Richardson said, his voice still steady but with a slight edge. "I have all the supporting documentation. However, some of these consulting relationships involve proprietary competitive intelligence, so I'd prefer to discuss the details in executive session." Chairman Blackstone's eyes narrowed slightly. "David, this board has appropriate confidentiality protocols. If you have concerns about sharing financial details with the full board, perhaps we need to revisit our governance structure." No, that's not necessary." Richardson backpedaled quickly. "I simply want to ensure we're protecting Technova's competitive advantages. Let me pull up the detailed expense categorizations." As Richardson fumbled with his laptop, trying to access files that would support his fabricated story, Marcus made his move. He quietly approached Chairman Blackstone's chair under the pretense of refilling his water glass. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said quietly, his voice so low that only Blackstone could hear. "I believe you're expecting this." Marcus discreetly placed the sealed envelope beside Blackstone's portfolio, then continued his service routine as if nothing had happened. Blackstone's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw the chairman's hand move to cover the envelope. Their eyes met briefly, and Blackstone gave an almost imperceptible nod. The revelation was about to begin. Richardson, still struggling with his laptop, looked up to see the board members watching him with increasing skepticism. "Technical difficulties," he said with a forced laugh. "Give me just one moment to access the encrypted files." "David," Patricia Chen said, her voice carrying a note of authority that hadn't been there earlier, "perhaps we should take a brief recess while you resolve these technical issues." "That won't be necessary," Chairman Blackstone said firmly, opening the envelope Marcus had provided. "I believe we have everything we need to continue this discussion." Richardson looked up sharply, sensing a shift in the room's dynamics, but not understanding its source. "Harold, is there something—" David, Blackstone interrupted, removing documents from the envelope. Before you continue with your presentation, I think this board needs to address some concerning information that has come to our attention. The color began to drain from Richardson's face. I'm not sure what you mean. Blackstone said, his voice taking on the steely tone of a man who had built and lost fortunes, who had seen every form of corporate malfeasance over 4 decades in business, that we need to discuss your creative accounting methods, your fictitious consulting companies, and your systematic theft from this company. The boardroom fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Silicon Valley traffic 40 floors below. Richardson's confident facade cracked completely, revealing the panicked expression of a man whose carefully constructed lies were collapsing around him. Harold, I don't know what you think you've heard, but I know exactly what I've heard, David. And more importantly, I know exactly what I've seen. Blackstone held up a photograph, one of the images Marcus had taken of Richardson's handwritten notes about alternative accounting structures. The question now, Blackstone continued, his eyes never leaving Richardson's face, is whether you'd like to explain yourself or whether you'd prefer we call in the federal investigators who are already reviewing your activities. Richardson's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the conference table. Around the room, board members stared in shocked silence, trying to process the dramatic turn the meeting had taken. And in the corner, still methodically arranging coffee cups and appearing completely invisible to everyone in the room, Marcus Thompson smiled grimly. Phase 1 was complete, but the real shock was still to come. The silence in the Technova boardroom stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap at any moment. David Richardson stood frozen beside his chair, his face cycling through shades of white as the reality of his situation crashed over him like a Silicon Valley tsunami. The quarterly presentation that was supposed to cement his reputation as a financial genius had become his public execution. Harold, Richardson finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Whatever documents you have there, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Reasonable explanation. Chairman Blackstone's voice cut through Richardson's stammering like a laser through paper. He held up another photograph from Marcus's evidence collection. Is there a reasonable explanation for Monaco Consulting Solutions, a company that exists only in your personal bank account? Or perhaps you'd like to explain the $47,000 client dinner in Monaco that coincided with your personal vacation. Board member Janet Morrison leaned forward, her Goldman Sachs training evident in her sharp analysis. David, these are serious allegations. If Harold has documentation of financial improprieties, we need full disclosure immediately. Richardson's eyes darted around the room, seeking escape or allies, but finding only stern faces and disappointed stares. His gaze briefly fell on Marcus, who continued organizing coffee service with the invisible efficiency of a professional cleaner, completely beneath Richardson's notice even in his moment of desperation. I can explain everything, Richardson said, attempting to regain his composure. Yes, there have been some creative financing solutions, but everything was done in Technova's best interests. We're in a competitive market, and sometimes unconventional approaches. CEO Patricia Chen's voice carried a mix of disbelief and anger. David, are you seriously trying to justify embezzlement as innovative business strategy? It's not embezzlement, Richardson snapped, his carefully maintained facade finally cracking completely. I've generated hundreds of millions in value for this company. My financial strategies have made every person in this room wealthier. A few million in operational flexibility is a rounding error compared to what I've accomplished. The arrogance in his voice shocked even the experienced board members. Robert Hayes, who had seen his share of corporate scandals, shook his head in disgust. David, listen to yourself. You're admitting to financial fraud and trying to justify it as compensation you deserved. I am the reason this company succeeded, Richardson shouted, abandoning all pretense of professional composure. Before I arrived, Technova was just another startup burning through venture capital. I built the financial infrastructure that made growth possible. I created the systems that attracted investors. You deserve to be in federal prison, Blackstone interrupted coldly. And that's exactly where you're heading. In the corner of the room, Marcus continued his service duties, but his attention was completely focused on the unfolding drama. Richardson's meltdown was even more spectacular than he had anticipated. The man's ego was so massive that even when caught red-handed, he couldn't accept responsibility for his crimes. "Harold, please," Richardson said, suddenly shifting tactics and attempting a conciliatory tone. "We're all adults here. We all understand that business at this level requires flexibility. I'm willing to restructure my compensation package, maybe return some of the questioned expenses. There's no need to involve outside authorities. Return some of the questioned expenses." Board member Susan Walker spoke for the first time, her voice dripping with incredulity. "David, we're talking about systematic theft. This isn't a negotiation about your bonus structure." Blackstone opened the envelope further and removed a thick stack of documents. "David, we have evidence of fraudulent consulting contracts totaling over $8.2 million across the past 18 months. We have documentation of personal expenses charged to company accounts exceeding $1.3 million. We have records of unauthorized use of corporate aircraft for personal travel valued at $430,000. With each number, Richardson seemed to shrink further into himself. The board members' expressions ranged from disgust to shock to barely controlled anger. But perhaps most disturbing, Blackstone continued, we have evidence that you've been manipulating financial reports, pressuring subordinates to falsify records, and creating a culture of fear to maintain your schemes. At this, Peterson's name wasn't mentioned, but Marcus knew the chairman was referring to the conversations he had documented between Richardson and the terrified financial analyst. Tom Peterson submitted his resignation this morning, Patricia Chen added quietly, along with a detailed statement about the pressure you placed on him to manipulate quarterly reports. Richardson's face went ashen. Peterson? That little weasel went behind my back after everything I've done for his career? Everything you've done? Morrison's voice was sharp with disbelief. David, you threatened his livelihood to coerce him into financial fraud. The man was terrified of losing his job and supporting his family. I made his career, Richardson protested. Before I promoted him, he was just another analyst shuffling papers. I gave him responsibility, authority, a six-figure salary. You gave him an ultimatum to commit crimes or face unemployment, Hayes corrected. There's a difference between mentorship and coercion. As the confrontation escalated, Marcus noticed something changing in the room's dynamics. Richardson's desperation was making him increasingly reckless, and his attacks on Peterson and attempts to justify his actions were only making his situation worse. Fine, Richardson said suddenly, straightening his tie and attempting to regain some dignity. You want my resignation? You have it. I'll clean out my office and be gone by the end of the day. But don't think for a moment that Technova will be better off without me. Good luck explaining to investors why your CFO left suddenly. The audacity of his statement left the board momentarily speechless. Even facing overwhelming evidence of criminal activity, Richardson was trying to negotiate as if he held some kind of leverage. David, Blackstone said slowly, I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't about your resignation. This is about criminal prosecution. Federal investigators are already reviewing the evidence. The SEC has been notified. Your assets are being frozen as we speak. For the first time, true fear flickered in Richardson's eyes. Federal investigators? Harold, surely we can handle this internally. Think about Technova's reputation, the stock price, the investor confidence. I am thinking about Technova's reputation, Blackstone replied firmly, which is why we're going to cooperate fully with authorities and demonstrate that this company has zero tolerance for financial fraud. Richardson's legs seemed to give out. and he slumped into his chair. The reality of his situation was finally penetrating his massive ego. My lawyers. I need to call my lawyers. Your lawyers are welcome to meet you at the Federal Building, Patricia Chen said. Security is already cleaning out your office under FBI supervision. As if summoned by her words, the boardroom door opened and two men in dark suits entered, clearly federal agents. Behind them came Technova's head of security, looking grim but determined. Mr. Richardson, the lead agent said, showing his credentials. I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. As Agent Martinez read Richardson his rights, the disgraced CFO's eyes swept the room one final time. His gaze lingered on each board member, perhaps hoping for some sign of sympathy or support, but finding only disgust and disappointment. His eyes passed over Marcus without recognition. Even in his moment of downfall, the janitor remained invisible to him. This is insane, Richardson muttered as the handcuffs clicked into place. I built this company's financial foundation. Without me, Technova would still be operating out of a garage. You'll regret this. The only thing we regret, Chairman Blackstone said as Richardson was led toward the door, is that it took this long to discover your criminal activities. As the door closed behind Richardson and the federal agents, the boardroom fell into stunned silence. The dramatic confrontation had lasted less than 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. The quarterly meeting that was supposed to celebrate Technova's continued success had become a criminal investigation. Jesus, Robert Hayes finally said, running his hand through his hair. In 30 years of business, I've never seen anything quite like that. The arrogance was breathtaking, Susan Walker added. Even caught red-handed, he was trying to negotiate and justify his actions. Patricia Chen looked around the table at her board members, her expression a mixture of anger and determination. The question now is how we move forward. We need to assess the full extent of the damage, reassure our investors, and rebuild trust. Agreed, Blackstone said, already shifting into crisis management mode. But first, I think this board owes a debt of gratitude to the person who brought this evidence to our attention. The board members looked around the room, confused. The federal investigation had been mentioned, but the source of the initial evidence hadn't been revealed. Blackstone turned toward the corner where Marcus was quietly collecting the coffee service items. Marcus, I think it's time for you to join this conversation officially. Every head in the room turned toward Marcus, confusion evident on their faces. The invisible janitor, who had been cleaning around them for the past 30 minutes, was suddenly the center of attention. Marcus straightened up, set down his cleaning cloth, and walked toward the conference table with a confidence that seemed to come from nowhere. The submissive invisible service worker was gone, replaced by someone with unmistakable authority and intelligence. Board members, Marcus said, his voice clear and professional, I believe it's time for proper introductions. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm your new CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia Chen's mouth fell open. Janet Morrison gripped the edge of the table. Robert Hayes stared as if he'd seen a ghost. Harold, Patricia Chen said slowly, what the hell is going on? Blackstone smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Ladies and gentlemen, meet our secret weapon. Marcus has been conducting an undercover investigation of Technova's financial operations for the past month. His findings exposed Richardson's criminal enterprise and saved this company from potentially catastrophic damage. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down at the conference table, no longer the invisible janitor, but clearly someone with authority and expertise. The janitorial position was a cover that allowed me to observe operations, gather evidence, and build the case against Richardson. Over the past 4 weeks, I documented systematic financial fraud, employee intimidation, and corporate theft, totaling nearly $10 million. The transformation was so complete, so shocking, that the board members could only stare. The man who had been invisible to them for 30 minutes was suddenly commanding the room with the presence of a seasoned executive. "But Marcus," Patricia Chen said, struggling to process what she was hearing, You were... "I was exactly what everyone expected to see," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "A janitor, invisible, beneath notice. It's amazing what people will say and do when they think no one important is watching." And in that moment, the full genius of the plan became clear to everyone in the room. Richardson's downfall hadn't just been about catching a thief, it had been a masterclass in corporate investigation, executed by someone who understood that sometimes the best view of a company's true operations came from the bottom up. The real shock was just beginning. The Technova boardroom had witnessed many dramatic moments over the years. Hostile takeover attempts, breakthrough product launches, and million-dollar deals that shaped the technology industry. But nothing had prepared the board members for the revelation that their new CEO had been hiding in plain sight as a janitor for the past month. Patricia Chen, still processing the shock, was the first to find her voice. "Marcus, I don't understand. Harold, you said he's our new CEO, but I'm the CEO of Technova. What exactly is happening here?" Chairman Blackstone leaned back in his chair, a mixture of satisfaction and relief evident in his expression. "Patricia, 3 months ago, the board received an anonymous tip about potential financial irregularities in our executive operations. Given the sensitive nature of the allegations and the need for absolute discretion, we decided to bring in an outside investigator." Marcus, now seated comfortably at the conference table, had shed every trace of his janitor persona. His posture was confident, his voice carried natural authority, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone accustomed to analyzing complex business situations. "The board contacted Blackstone and Associates Corporate Investigations," Marcus explained, his voice steady and professional. "I'm a partner in the firm, specializing in financial fraud and corporate malfeasance. My background includes an MBA from Wharton, CPA certification, and 15 years of experience in forensic accounting and corporate security." Board member Janet Morrison shook her head in amazement. "So the janitor story was completely fabricated?" "Not completely," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "I did work as a janitor during college to pay for my education. The skills came in handy for this assignment. But my primary expertise is in financial investigation and corporate restructuring." Robert Hayes leaned forward, his business instincts engaging despite his shock. "Marcus, this is incredible work. But Harold mentioned you're our new CEO. I'm confused about the corporate structure implications." Blackstone cleared his throat, preparing to explain the full scope of the plan that had been months in the making. "The board has been concerned about Technova's rapid growth and the need for enhanced oversight and governance. Richardson's fraud was actually the tip of the iceberg. We suspected broader systemic issues that required comprehensive investigation." Patricia Chen's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Harold, are you saying there are other problems beyond Richardson's embezzlement?" "Not problems exactly," Marcus interjected, "but opportunities for improvement. During my investigation, I identified several areas where Technova could optimize operations, enhance security protocols, and strengthen financial controls. The board asked me to prepare a comprehensive restructuring plan." Susan Walker, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Marcus, your investigative work is impressive, but CEO of a billion-dollar technology company requires a very different skill set. What's your background in technology leadership?" Marcus reached into his jacket, no longer a janitor's uniform, but a perfectly tailored business suit that had been waiting in Blackstone's office, and removed a leather portfolio. "Before founding the investigation firm, I spent 8 years in technology consulting, including 3 years as COO of Dataflow Systems, which we grew from $50 million to $400 million in revenue before the acquisition by Microsoft." The board members exchanged glances, beginning to understand that Marcus Thompson was far more than a skilled investigator. His credentials were impressive by any standard. Additionally, Marcus continued, I hold patents in data security and cloud computing architecture. My technical background was actually one of the reasons the board felt I could effectively investigate Technova while understanding the industry context. Patricia Chen, who had been processing this information, finally spoke with a mixture of respect and concern. Marcus, your qualifications are clearly exceptional, but I'm still confused about my role. Are you replacing me as CEO? Not replacing, Blackston clarified quickly. Complementing. The board has been discussing a dual leadership structure that would allow Technova to benefit from both Patricia's visionary product leadership and Marcus's operational and financial expertise. Marcus nodded, his expression serious and respectful. Patricia, your technical vision and product innovation have made Technova the success it is today. The board isn't questioning your leadership. They're looking to strengthen the executive team with additional expertise in areas like financial oversight, operational security, and corporate governance. So what exactly are you proposing? Patricia asked, her tone professional but cautious. A partnership, Marcus replied directly. You continue as Chief Executive Officer, focusing on product development, technology strategy, and market vision. I would serve as Chief Operating Officer and President, overseeing financial operations, corporate security, legal compliance, and administrative functions. The proposal made immediate sense to the experienced board members. Technology companies often struggled with the balance between innovation and operational discipline, and the dual leadership model could address both needs. It's not unprecedented, Robert Hayes observed. Google had a similar structure with Larry Page and Eric Schmidt. The combination of visionary leadership and operational expertise can be very powerful. Janet Morrison was studying Marcus intently. Your investigation of Richardson was masterful, but it also demonstrated something concerning about our corporate culture. How did a CFO operate a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme without anyone noticing? Marcus's expression grew serious. That's exactly the systemic issue the board was concerned about. Richardson's fraud was enabled by weak internal controls, insufficient oversight, and a culture that didn't encourage questioning authority figures. He opened his portfolio and removed a bound report. During my investigation, I identified 17 specific areas where Technova's governance and oversight could be strengthened. Richardson's embezzlement was possible because he had too much unilateral authority over financial operations, and because employees like Tom Peterson were afraid to challenge questionable practices. Patricia Chen leaned forward, her interest clearly engaged. What kind of changes are you recommending? Segregation of financial duties, mandatory dual approval for expenses over certain thresholds, regular independent audits, and most importantly, a corporate culture that encourages transparency and accountability at all levels, Marcus explained. Richardson succeeded because people were afraid to question him. That has to change. Susan Walker nodded approvingly. Those are exactly the kinds of controls that prevent fraud and protect shareholder value. Marcus, your investigation may have saved Technova from much more serious damage. The investigation also revealed Technova's tremendous strengths, Marcus added, looking around the table. Your employee satisfaction scores are exceptional, your technology is genuinely innovative, and your market position is incredibly strong. Richardson's fraud was an aberration, not a reflection of the company's core values. As the conversation continued, the board members began to see the full scope of what had been accomplished. The investigation hadn't just caught a criminal, it had provided a comprehensive analysis of Technova's operations and a roadmap for enhanced governance. Marcus, Patricia Chen said thoughtfully, I have to admit the idea of partnership leadership is intriguing. My background is in product development and engineering. Having someone with your financial and operational expertise handling those aspects could allow me to focus more on innovation and technology strategy. That's exactly the synergy the board envisioned, Blackstone confirmed. Patricia's technical brilliance combined with Marcus's operational discipline could position Technova for even more dramatic growth. Marcus looked directly at Patricia, his expression sincere and collaborative. Patricia, I want to be clear about something. This isn't a takeover or a replacement. Your vision built this company, and your leadership will continue to drive its future. I'm proposing to handle the operational complexities so you can focus on what you do best, creating technology that changes the world. The respect in his voice was genuine, and Patricia could see that Marcus understood the delicate balance required for successful partnership leadership. And what about the immediate crisis management? Robert Hayes asked. Richardson's arrest will be public knowledge within hours. We need to control the narrative and reassure investors. Already handled, Marcus replied, demonstrating the thoroughness that had characterized his investigation. I've prepared a comprehensive communication strategy, including investor calls, employee meetings, and media statements. The key message is that Technova's proactive investigation and cooperation with authorities demonstrates our commitment to transparency and accountability. Janet Morrison smiled for the first time since Richardson's arrest. You've thought of everything, haven't you? That's what good investigations require, Marcus replied, anticipating consequences and preparing solutions. As the afternoon wore on, the board members found themselves increasingly impressed with Marcus's preparation, professionalism, and strategic thinking. The man who had appeared to be a simple janitor had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of executive leader Technova needed. I have one final question, Patricia Chen said as the discussion wound down. Marcus, why the elaborate undercover operation? Couldn't you have investigated Richardson's activities through traditional auditing methods? Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Traditional audits examine documents and financial records, but they don't reveal behavioral patterns or cultural issues. By working inside the company as an invisible employee, I could observe how people actually behaved when they thought no one important was watching. He paused, remembering Richardson's arrogant dismissal of the janitor, who couldn't even spell quarterly report. Richardson's contempt for service employees revealed everything about his character and his willingness to exploit others. His casual discussion of financial manipulation in front of just the janitor showed how completely he had separated himself from accountability. Those insights were only possible through direct observation. The board members nodded, understanding that Marcus's investigation had been as much about corporate culture as financial fraud. Well, Chairman Blackstone said, looking around the table, I think we have a clear path forward. Patricia continues as CEO, Marcus joins as COO and President, and we implement the governance reforms necessary to prevent future problems. Agreed, Patricia Chen said, extending her hand to Marcus. Welcome to Technova, partner. As Marcus shook her hand, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this moment. 4 weeks ago, he had been an invisible janitor, mocked and dismissed by the very people he was investigating. Now he was preparing to help lead one of Silicon Valley's most successful companies. But the most satisfying moment was still to come, the moment when the entire Technova workforce would learn the truth about their new executive and the investigation that had saved their company. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Technova Industries stood transformed. The glass tower in Palo Alto hummed with renewed energy, its employees working with the confidence that comes from knowing their company operates with absolute integrity. The scandal that could have destroyed Technova had instead become the catalyst for unprecedented growth and success. Marcus Thompson stood in his corner office on the 39th floor, one floor below the executive suite. A deliberate choice that kept him close to operations rather than isolated in the ivory tower. Through his windows, he could see the bustling campus below, where Technova's workforce had grown by 30% since Richardson's arrest and the implementation of comprehensive governance reforms. A soft knock on his door interrupted his morning review of quarterly projections. "Come in," he called, looking up to see Sarah Martinez from Human Resources, the same woman who had welcomed him kindly on his first day as a janitor. "Good morning, Marcus," Sarah said, carrying a steaming coffee cup and a warm smile. "I wanted to update you on the employee satisfaction surveys. The results are remarkable." Marcus gestured to the chairs in front of his desk, the same professional courtesy he had observed from Patricia Chen during his undercover days. "Please, sit. What are the numbers telling us?" "Employee confidence in company leadership is up 47% since the restructuring," Sarah reported, consulting her tablet. "More importantly, 89% of employees say they feel comfortable reporting concerns or irregularities to management. That's a complete transformation from the fear-based culture Richardson created." Marcus nodded with satisfaction. The cultural transformation had been as important as the financial reforms. "How are the new reporting protocols working?" "Exceptionally well. We've received over 200 employee suggestions for operational improvements, and we've implemented about 60% of them. People feel heard and valued in ways they never did before." As Sarah left his office, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought Technova to this point. Richardson's trial had concluded 3 months ago with a conviction on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and racketeering. The former CFO was now serving a 15-year federal sentence and had been ordered to pay $12.7 million in restitution. But more importantly, the investigation and its aftermath had revealed Technova's true strength: its people. Employees who had been intimidated and silenced under Richardson's regime had emerged as innovative, dedicated professionals who genuinely cared about their company's success. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Chen. "Board meeting in 10 minutes. Prepare for good news," he smiled, gathering his materials for what had become a monthly celebration of Technova's continued success. The partnership between Patricia's visionary leadership and Marcus's operational discipline had exceeded everyone's expectations. The company's stock price had risen 67% since Richardson's arrest, driven by investor confidence in Technova's enhanced governance and accelerated innovation. The boardroom where Richardson had been dramatically arrested now hosted meetings focused on expansion, innovation, and strategic growth. As Marcus entered, he saw the familiar faces of board members who had witnessed his transformation from invisible janitor to executive leader. "Marcus!" Chairman Blackstone called out warmly. "Ready for Patricia's announcement?" Patricia Chen stood at the head of the table, her expression radiating excitement and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to report that Technova has just secured the largest contract in our company's history. The Department of Defense has selected our AI security platform for a 5-year, $2.8 billion implementation across all military branches." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. The contract represented not just massive revenue, but validation of Technova's technology leadership and operational reliability. This contract was only possible because of the governance reforms and operational excellence we've implemented over the past 6 months, Patricia continued, nodding toward Marcus. The DoD's due diligence process was incredibly thorough, examining everything from our financial controls to our corporate culture. We passed with flying colors. Board member Janet Morrison leaned forward with interest. "Patricia, what were the key factors in winning such a competitive contract?" "3 things," Patricia replied confidently. "First, our technology is genuinely superior. Our AI algorithms outperformed every competitor by significant margins. Second, our financial transparency and governance structure gave them confidence in our reliability as a long-term partner. And third, our corporate culture demonstrated the kind of integrity and accountability they require in defense contractors." Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The investigation that had begun with catching a thief had evolved into a comprehensive transformation that positioned Technova for unprecedented success. "Marcus," Robert Hayes said, "your operational leadership has been instrumental in this achievement." The DoD specifically mentioned Technova's enhanced internal controls and risk management as factors in their decision. "Thank you, Robert, but this success belongs to our entire team," Marcus replied. "The employees who were afraid to speak up under Richardson's regime are now our greatest assets for innovation and quality control." As the meeting continued with discussions of expansion plans, new hiring initiatives, and strategic partnerships, Marcus's mind wandered to a conversation he'd had the previous week with Tom Peterson, the financial analyst who had been terrorized by Richardson. Peterson had returned to Technova after Richardson's arrest, but in a new role as Director of Financial Compliance, a position created specifically to ensure that no single individual could ever again manipulate the company's financial systems. During their meeting, Peterson had thanked Marcus for giving him the courage to come forward with evidence against Richardson. "You saved my career and probably my sanity," Peterson had said. "I was having panic attacks every night, knowing I was being forced to participate in fraud, but terrified of losing my job and my family's security." "You saved yourself, Tom," Marcus had replied. "You had the courage to do the right thing when it mattered most." The conversation had reminded Marcus why the investigation had been necessary. Richardson's crimes weren't just about stolen money. They were about the human cost of corruption, the fear and intimidation that poisoned corporate culture and destroyed people's lives. After the board meeting, Marcus walked through Technova's offices, a routine he had maintained since becoming COO. But now, instead of pushing a cleaning cart and being invisible, he was greeted warmly by employees who respected his leadership and appreciated his accessibility. "Marcus," called Jennifer Walsh, the junior accountant who had unknowingly provided crucial insights during his undercover investigation. "Do you have a minute to look at the new expense reporting system? I think we can make it even more user-friendly." "Absolutely, Jennifer. Your input on financial processes has been invaluable." As they discussed system improvements, Marcus marveled at the transformation. Jennifer, who had been nervous and stressed under Richardson's regime, was now confident and innovative, contributing ideas that strengthened Technova's operations. Later that afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Jim Patterson, the facilities supervisor who had trained him during his janitor days, knocked on his office door with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. "Marcus, or should I say, Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Jim, please come in." "And it's still Marcus. How are you doing?" Jim settled into a chair, shaking his head with amazement. "I've been thinking about this for months. You worked alongside me for 4 weeks, and I never suspected anything. You were genuinely good at the job, respectful, hard-working, professional. How did you pull it off?" Marcus smiled, remembering the genuine friendship he had developed with Jim during those undercover weeks. "Jim, I learned more from you about leadership and integrity than you might realize. You treated every employee with respect, you took pride in your work, and you genuinely cared about Technova's success. Those are the qualities that make great leaders. But you were investigating us the whole time." "I was investigating financial fraud, not the character of people like you," Marcus clarified. "Your integrity and professionalism were never in question. In fact, employees like you were the reason I knew Technova was worth saving." As Jim left his office, Marcus reflected on the complex emotions surrounding his undercover investigation. Some employees had initially felt deceived when they learned the truth, but most had come to understand that the investigation had protected their jobs and their company's future. The day's final meeting was with Patricia Chen, their weekly partnership review that had become one of Marcus's favorite professional interactions. Patricia's technical brilliance combined with his operational expertise had created a leadership dynamic that exceeded both their individual capabilities. Marcus, I've been thinking about our success over the past 6 months, Patricia said, as they reviewed strategic plans. The partnership model has worked better than I ever imagined. Your operational discipline has freed me to focus on innovation in ways I never could before. And your vision has given operational excellence a purpose beyond just efficiency, Marcus replied. We're not just running a company well. We're building technology that genuinely improves people's lives. Patricia smiled, then grew more serious. I have a confession to make. When Harold first told me about bringing in an outside investigator, I was skeptical. I thought it might be corporate paranoia or board micromanagement. I never imagined we had a Richardson-level problem. Most companies don't, until they do, Marcus observed. The warning signs were there, but they required someone with specific expertise to recognize and investigate them. Your investigation saved Technova, but more than that, it revealed our true potential. We're stronger now than we've ever been. Indeed, as evening fell over Silicon Valley, Marcus prepared to leave the office, but first he made one final stop. He took the elevator to the lobby where his journey at Technova had begun 6 months earlier. When David Richardson had mocked the janitor who probably couldn't even spell quarterly report, the lobby looked the same. Italian marble floors, contemporary art, digital displays showing Technova's soaring stock price, but everything had changed. The fear and intimidation that had characterized Richardson's leadership had been replaced by transparency, accountability, and genuine respect for every employee. Marcus thought about Richardson, now serving his federal sentence and facing the reality that his arrogance and greed had cost him everything. The man who had believed himself untouchable had been brought down by the invisible janitor he had dismissed and ridiculed. But Marcus felt no satisfaction in Richardson's downfall. The real victory was Technova's transformation, a company that had not just survived a major scandal, but had emerged stronger, more innovative, and more successful than ever before. As he walked to his car in the executive parking lot, Marcus passed the spot where Richardson's Bentley had once been parked. Now it held Patricia's modest Tesla and his own practical Honda Accord, a deliberate choice that reflected their shared commitment to substance over appearance. 6 months ago, Marcus Thompson had entered Technova Industries as an undercover investigator posing as a janitor. Tonight, he left as the COO of one of Silicon Valley's most successful companies, having helped transform not just Technova's operations, but its entire corporate culture. The investigation was over. The real work of building an exceptional company was just beginning. And somewhere in a federal prison, David Richardson was probably still wondering how the janitor he had mocked and dismissed had become the architect of his downfall and the catalyst for Technova's greatest success. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room really is the one everyone underestimates.